Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Femme Force Podcast. My name is Rachel Paskman, and I am your host. And I am so excited because today I am joined by Maggie Lord, who is the founder of Rustic Wedding Chic and one of the early pioneers in the online wedding media space, and did so well that she had her company acquired by David's Bridal and now is a strategic advisor for others in this space. So I'm so excited for Maggie to be on today. She's going to tell us a lot about her entrepreneur journey and like building her empire and like all about female founded brands, which this is what this podcast is all about. So thank you, Maggie, for being here. I'm so excited to have you.
Thank you for asking. I'm excited to be here.
So can you tell the listeners just a little bit about your background and then how did Rustic Wedding Chic start? Because I mean, this was a new space at the time.
Yeah, this was 2008, and I was engaged to my now husband. And if you kind of go back into that world, there was no Pinterest, there was no Instagram, right? There really was a very limited way to find wedding inspiration online. There was a handful of quote unquote blogs at the time, like
Yeah.
they were not full media companies, they were blogs. And mostly personal blogs about somebody who planned their own wedding. But we were still taking images out of wedding magazines, that you would find at like Barnes and Noble. So there was this movement towards finding more pretty pictures and things online, but it really wasn't built out the way today you can find any image that you would ever need.
Yeah.
So I was frustrated because I was planning a long distance wedding. We live in Connecticut, but we were getting married at my family's lake house in northern Wisconsin. So trying to convey my look and what I wanted to my vendors was really a challenge, number one. And number two, I kind of had an idea in mind, but I really needed some inspiration of like, what did I want it to look like? And so I started Googling around and was not finding much. There was a couple of wedding blogs, but they really were kind of more of a general, like the knot was around, but like it was general
Yeah.
information, general inspiration. And I was really looking for this really specific look. What I didn't realize was that there was a lot of other brides currently looking for this inspiration as well. And I guess like I use the term rustic, but it that really became an umbrella term for like barn, vintage, farm, outdoor,
Yeah.
backyard, DIY. Like it really started to cover a lot of different people's styles. So I would go to a wedding photographer's website, look through their galleries, and I'd say, email
Oh,
them
that's
that you
smart.
I know you have such a pretty picture here in your portfolio. It's a beautiful bride, with her groom and like on a farm or something. And I'd be like, can I put it on my wedding blog and I'll link to you and say, and they were like, that's great. Because they had not yet figured out like real weddings were going to be a thing on every wedding site. So they were like, oh, that's free advertising. Great. So I started that way. And little by little, photographers then started to reach out to us and were like, I have this whole wedding with, 85 images that I would love to share. And so I launched a media company without knowing I was launching
Yeah.
a media company. I have always been very entrepreneurial. I have had a million different businesses since I was like 6 years old. The first one was Maggie's Shell Shop. I'd go to the beach on the weekend, collect shells, and then sell them in my little shell shop. So I knew I always had it in me. I just had not figured out what the right path was going to be at that time. I was finishing up graduate school. We were engaged. And within the first month of putting up images, we had a full readership. I mean, I was playing catch up to the
That's
brand. The brand
amazing.
was
Yeah.
running on legs, and I was playing catch up. So that's kind of how it all started. And I was very lucky enough to be able to lead Rustic Wedding Chic for 12 years. In the process, we built a team, monetized the site very well to make money. We were able to license our name to product. I wrote 6 books in the process. So it really was something I'm very, very proud of and a wonderful chapter in my life.
As you should be. I mean, that's phenomenal, especially in 2008. I mean, the digital space then, I mean, Facebook had just came around. So
Right.
we were just learning how to share with others. MySpace was our only kind of
Yep.
sharing platform at the time. Do you feel like the way that the digital age has now changed and we're in where we have computers in our hands at all times, basically, and we have information like in the nanosecond that we need? How do you feel like it would have done back in 2008 if we had this kind of technology?
That is a really good question that no one has ever asked me. Believe it or not. Okay, so here's what I think. I think that it was right time, right place for sure. Number
Yeah.
one, the wedding market, especially with online imagery and vendor database and all those other things, it was not as saturated as it is today. I
Yeah.
could literally, there was four of us in the space, and some of us are still around, and some of us are not. So with the fact that it was so limited, it was easy for us to really make a name fast. Today, it's much harder. And the reason why I think it is because there's so many platforms to choose from of where to share and how to share your content. So when Instagram came out, we adopted that very early in the company. We're like, this is a great way to showcase our imagery and, you know, share tips and everything else. Pinterest was a critical thing for us to be able to figure out early. Even before there was a Pinterest business, Rustic Wedding Chic was on Pinterest. And it was a real driver for traffic to Rustic Wedding Chic without question. I think when we sold in 2020, it had over 10 million monthly impressions of content.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
insane.
So Pinterest was a huge thing for us. But what I think would be the challenge today is how do you stand out on Pinterest, on TikTok, on Instagram, on YouTube? You have to play to all of these channels, and we didn't have that challenge. So I think it would be harder for us to stand out. But I do think good content with, you know, really interesting, like playing to your niche and finding that niche in a space will always kind of stand out to consumers.
Yeah. And going with the niche. So, I mean, you talked about rustic and how it can be from DIY to barns and, you know, the farmhouse vibe. You were one of the first to really like, you were blogging about it and like it came about as a whole niche, like the rustic farmhouse, where is like a whole thing within the wedding and within homes now and all of this thing. How was that such a, or why was that such a strong focus for you in the
Yeah, so
brand?
I was planning my own actual very rustic but very elegant. Like I was merging the location of where we were having it with my Connecticut sense of like style. And so that's why I called it Rustic Wedding Chic, because I was
Yeah.
like, I'm blending the chic Connecticut vibe that I have with my northern Wisconsin location, which is so important to me and my family. But I just found that it started to creep into the wedding space where people did not want your cookie cutter wedding. And I think one of the reasons why was because we were seeing more images of different types of weddings and the way we were sharing. So the your brain like really got to just explode with like, oh, I don't have to just go to my local country club and have the same wedding that the bride the day before had. You know, people were being inspired by so many different things. And then I think there was just this movement of like, I can plan whatever I want. You know, Etsy was still early
Yeah.
and was fueling how brides were accessorizing their own wedding look, their wedding decor. So they weren't just having to go down the traditional path. So it really was this intersection of information being shared via online with images, but also things like Etsy, you know, being able to really create your own vision for your wedding.
And that's amazing. I mean, rustic chic isn't going anywhere, so I think
Yeah.
you're safe on that niche. When you started this, and then I mean, you said in the beginning, like you basically made a media company without making a without knowing you were making a media company. What kind of strategies did you have? When did you realize like you could scale this and you can make this like something big?
Yeah, I think it was when we started to get we had eyes on the website, which was great, but we started to get a lot of emails. Brides were reaching out saying, "Do you know of a barn in Michigan? I can't find one," because the vendor directories were not niche at that time. There was just the general. So, like, if you went to some of the major players in the wedding space, you had to sort through like a Holiday Inn was next to a different type of venue. You know, like it wasn't so curated. And so when I started to get all these inquiries from brides, emails, I couldn't keep up with my inbox. I was like, oh wait, they're not being serviced the way they need to be.
Yeah.
They're underserved right now. And so we need to be able to get them that information of the barns in Michigan that are available. And then there was a whole Ask Maggie section with all of these questions that I was fielding. I would put out then in an article on the website because I was like, it's great to connect with a bride one-on-one, but I want to be able to talk on a bigger scale.
Yeah.
So it was when we realized that we had advertisers coming to us asking for placement on the site because our readership was so strong. Our display ads from a monetization standpoint were doing fantastic. And then the brides were reaching out themselves saying, I want more. How can I get more?
I mean, and it's just so smart because of the way that you've been doing this. And as you said, you were trying to expand and you wanted to reach not just one bride, but so many different brides. How did you really cater your content and build this kind of loyal community?
We pushed out a lot of content. So I not only oversaw the editorial, but I'm responsible for probably 97% of the editorial that was published over those 12 years. I wrote and did almost every single one of them. So we pushed out new live content between 2 and 3 times a day,
Wow.
5 days a week, Monday through Friday. And on top of that, we were pushing out hundreds of Pinterest pins and that sort of content. And when I tell you, it went from a huge unlock happened for us when we were putting out pretty pictures and they could scroll through and look at a beautiful wedding and be inspired, to when we realized we could create content where we were the expert. 10 questions you need to ask your barn venue before you sign the contract. 15 ways that you can style your bridesmaid's dress to look rustic and chic. That is when our readership went from good to unbelievable, next level readership. That is when we positioned ourselves not only as a inspirational, but also then as a resource for knowledge and
Yeah,
information.
that's amazing. And do you feel like doing these kind of things and building that kind of community, like do you get referrals basically like because a bride hopes like what one wedding and then that's her only one. So you might not get a lot of like repeat return customers, obviously. But do you feel like it's a lot of word of mouth that these brides are like, this is where I found the information? Or do you feel like it's been from the digital platforms like Pinterest and those kind of things?
I think in the beginning, it was all about Google keyword searches. People were Googling about trying to find their wedding. Social media definitely transformed our business from good to
Yeah.
unbelievable, as it can do for so many businesses. But also the question about, yes, there's a lot of turnover in our readership, but we had them as a captive audience for 12 months or 14
Yeah.
months. And then they got married and that planning journey was over. But the minute that they got married, a new bride had just gotten engaged. So even though our turnover and readership was high, when we had them for the 12 to 14 months, they were super locked in. And, we would see on our analytics that sometimes we would have a reader who came, like 6 and 8 times a day to look at content. A bride is super obsessed with planning her wedding.
Love that for them. That's so cool. And you said that while you were building this and like you're building your own brand while doing this, you also wrote 6 books. Could you talk a little bit about those and how they like came into the field and what they're about
Yeah.
a little bit?
Yeah. It did not just fall into my lap or happen. It was definitely a strategic decision. We launched in 2008 and I got married in 2009. And my first book came out in 2012 and I had a newborn son at home. And so it was kind of a really pivotal moment in my life. A lot of my own personal life goals were happening, but then also a lot of professional goals. But in 2011, when I was pregnant, I made a choice that Rustic Wedding Chic was doing so well on a digital platform and so much readership. But like a light bulb went off in my head. I was like, I have to now take this offline as well. Like we need to be more multidimensional here in this company. We were digital first, but we didn't want to be digital only. So I went to a couple publishers and pitched the idea. I was like, this needs to be sitting on bookshelves, right? We need to take this content. It's a wonderful gift to give someone and it can be inspirational and also the planning process of how you do these things. And so what started with one book actually turned into 6 books along the way.
I mean, that's
But
amazing.
yeah, and the first book was called Rustic Wedding Chic to mirror what we were doing, but it was a way for also my own personal brand to step away from a little bit from Rustic Wedding Chic and position myself as an expert in this space and allow me to go on morning talk shows and all those other things that I did in those years to explain about wedding trends and what we were seeing in the wedding world and all of that sort of good stuff.
I mean, that's so smart too. And it's also like positioning you for what happened next as Rustic Wedding Chic got so big is your David's Bridal acquisition, which is phenomenal because David's Bridals is a household name as well.
Yeah, super big company. Obviously, over the years, when you're operating on that sort of level, we did have different suitors over the years come
Yeah.
out and say, what we would love to acquire you, or let's talk about this, or what would an M&A look like? And we had several conversations, and I met some very nice people. We talked to probably all the big wedding players that you would think of in the media space over that time. And we got closer to some acquisitions than others, but none of them ever felt like, okay, this is the moment, I'm ready. And in 2019, obviously not knowing what 2020 was going to hold for all of us,
Yeah.
I thought to myself, okay, so I've been doing this alone with a small team for a very long time. And the only way I can describe it is I feel like it's the child that doesn't go to college and lives in your basement and never reaches its full potential. I was like,
I love this.
I've done really, really, really good with this
Yeah.
smallish company. Then I've made a nice living from it. And it's been a great, I had such a wonderful work-life balance, being able to be there for my 3 little kids. And I was like, I think it's time. Like, it's gotta go. I love it, but it's got to go on to its next life. And I made a very short list of who I thought would be a perfect person to acquire it. And some were in the media space, some were not, some were retailers. And I emailed, a handful of people, and I didn't want to start with a broker. So I was like, I think I'm going to try to DIY this myself, reach out to people and say, this is from a strategic standpoint, this is why it makes sense. And I kind of said to myself, I'll give it like 6 to 8 months. And if I'm not getting any bites, then I'll go, and I live an hour outside of New York. I was like, I'll go talk to a broker and we'll get this thing over and done. But as it turned out, I met the right team at David's Bridal, and we had a conversation in person in Manhattan, New York, in March of 2020, early March.
I was there too. It's fine.
Okay. Yeah.
We didn't know, guys. We didn't know.
We didn't know. We sat down and had this lovely, like, 2-hour conversation. And I walked out of that meeting feeling so great. And I thought this leadership team was amazing. Most of them were new to David's Bridal. And I was like, man, they have a vision. And the world got a little dark and scary for everybody for a little bit, and our conversations kind of quieted down. But then they came back after the initial, everyone started to figure out how life was going to be able to operate. And I joined the David's leadership team in July of 2020, and it was publicly announced in October that they had acquired the company.
And that's phenomenal. And how do you feel, like, what is the process of having an acquisition, and what does that mean for you as a founder? How do you go through that? Like, for giving up something that you have built from the ground up?
Yeah. Well, over the years, they would always say to me, it was your first baby. And I was like, but it really isn't. I never really subscribed to that. I was like, I obviously built this thing. I nurtured it, had ups and downs along the way, high moments, low moments, the way you do, in anything. But I never felt like there wasn't going to be a time that I could say, okay, now I can detach myself from it. So the only way I can describe it is I really feel like, instead of saying it was my baby, it was more like a house. Like, you make great memories there, you're attached to it, but there are moments when you are ready to move on, and then somebody else comes in and gets to live in that house and make great memories and, do all the wonderful upgrades and additions and everything else. And that is really the way I looked at leaving Rustic Wedding Chic and giving it to someone else. And, it served me very, very well for the years that I ran the company. And I was very excited, being an entrepreneur at heart, to go and do something different also.
It's so cool, though. I mean, and just to have that opportunity to be at that level, where a company that is literally nationally known, possibly internationally known. I have not been a bride yet, but like David's Bridal, like, it's a household name here. So it's not something that's so uncommon.
Yeah. And it was, yes, it was a huge win for the company, for me personally. I think it would look different today. It was the height of COVID, so it was hard. Like, there was no big celebration for me. My husband and I, like, cheers on our, like, front porch, but and then I loved going over to David's Bridal and being part of what they were doing and changing. And it was a lovely learning experience. I met great people at David's. I can probably tell you the only corporate thing I will ever do in my life, because I know I'm an entrepreneur at heart, but I enjoyed the time I was there. And the company they were lovely people. They were making brides happy every day, and they were really innovating in the wedding space. So I was happy for the time that I spent there. And I was happy to, leave and be able to go on to this next chapter of my life, which I'm very passionate about, which is helping other women figure out how they can build their company and then scale and get out.
And how do you feel like how did it shift from like running your own company to being a strategic advisor and like not having that like company that you've been like with for so long? What was that like?
I would say to the more normal thought thinking person, like it's scary, but that's where I think as an entrepreneur, I
Mm.
kind of thrive. And over the years, I'd always had other female founders reach out because of the success and the scale of Rustic Wedding
Yeah.
Chic and how did you do it? And sometimes I did some light consulting, but the amount of people that reached out after it went public that I had sold the company was overwhelming. I mean, female founders from all, because it was love. I mean, it was people reading it saying, this is what I want for myself too. How do I do it?
Yeah, it's inspirational.
Yeah, and I was way too busy with my new job to be able
Yeah.
to really take them on in any capacity. So that was always in the back of my head that, I'm a very unlikely person. I am not your quintessential M&A, advisor or broker, but I walked through this experience. And for most people, the first time that they sell their company, it's very overwhelming and scary. And so I love the transition to now being able to work with lots of different people at all different the sizes of their company, this for what they're going to exit for. They're all so different. But I love working with all the different women that I'm working with right now.
I love that. And are you focused on the women that are more in the wedding space, or are you doing abroad from all entrepreneurs, selling
Yes,
seashells, like anybody doing anything?
yes, it's very, very broad. I have female founders who are in CPG brands, who are in apparel brands, who are in the wedding space. So it's really across the board. And I work both my company, Maggie Lord and Company, as an
Mhm.
advisor to these women, but I also get to work with this great group called the Whisper Group, which is a collective of women who have sold their businesses, who advise in the background. So our job is to really help you figure out how you can do this, who you can sell it to, and then really give you the confidence and set you up to be able to do this successfully.
And what are some key tips or tricks that you've learned from this that you share with some of these advisors that you could share with the listeners?
So one, I think that every business can be sold. The most common question I get, they're like, is there any value? I mean, this one woman was like, my company only makes about $300,000 a year. I'm like, there is value in it. You can sell it for
Yeah.
something. Even if you only sell it for 300,000, you're still selling and exiting a company. It's worth it. It's worth putting in the effort. So that's like the number one question. Is there value? And there definitely is. It's so much. I think a lot of women just feel like, oh, well, I'm going to close my small-ish business because I'm ready to do something else, or
It's
it's not
imposter syndrome.
financially successful. Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of times if they're not willing to go out and get investors, then I'm like, it's the right time to try to sell. Because someone on the other side is always going to ask themselves, is it easier to buy or build this if they want to add it into what they're currently doing? And most of the time, it's cheaper and faster if they can just acquire someone.
And how do people know like what the value of their business is? Like I feel like women especially undervalue ourselves in so many different aspects of our
Yeah.
lives all the time. I couldn't imagine having a business and then being like, Okay, you're offering me $1 million." And I'm like, "It's great, a
Yeah.
million, that's insane. Sure, why not?" When in reality, I should be asking for way more. It's like negotiating in a
Yeah.
job, I'm assuming for like you're saying for the pay raise and all of that. Like go high for and work your
Yes.
way down.
Exactly. Well, there is an easy way to get a valuation of your company, and that is just based on data. Like you plug in those numbers, right? You plug in your revenue and your EBITDA, and you look at your P&L. That gives you one set of numbers, which I always tell women, it's great. It's kind of like the baseline, and let's just like for now say it's probably okay, it's 3 times what you're currently doing in revenue. That's great. But that number also doesn't just represent what your company is worth, because you have to add in, what is your social media footprint? That is
Yeah.
value. There's a value in that, but you can't put a number on it the way you can with your revenue or your EBITDA. Where is there, do you have competition? Where do you stand in those things? How long have you been in business? Have you been trusted for the past 12 to 15 years? That adds value to what they're buying. So you have to look at the overall picture. So a true valuation based on numbers is great, but a lot of women forget to add in those other pieces of the puzzle that really represents the whole value of the company.
Do you feel like it's better at this stage of the world to go in and be doing like the brick and mortar or just focus on the digital because you can expand more? Like you said, Etsy,
Yeah.
Pinterest, like we've got TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, we've got it all.
All right. So that's a really interesting question. And I would say it's kind of a two-parter. Like one, I currently have clients who are opening brick and mortar, and I also have clients who are digital only. And I think the only way to really answer that is either one of those things is fine, but whatever you do with your business, you have to look at multiple revenue streams. You cannot rely solely on one thing. And I think the pandemic taught us that more than anything, because
Yeah.
when if you were a store and you had to close your doors, you had zero revenue coming in. But if you were able to, sell online and, and have other revenue streams, you were able to succeed and or at least get through. So any business that I'm working with, I tell them, let's look at multiple revenue streams. They don't all have to be equal. They don't all have to be bringing in a lot, but at least there's multiple of them. So you're not relying on one thing.
Do you feel like people should be a little more flexible, like not having a niche, but like being able to, I mean, hopefully we don't have another pandemic, we hope, but like if kind of unknown circumstances come in, being able to pivot like that and having different ways to get around.
Yes, I think being flexible in business is always a great thing, because when you're too rigid, you're really not opening yourself up to change and growth. And you have to grow and change with what the market is asking
Yeah.
of you, right? I mean, that is literally why, like there's those Main Street businesses where they got so narrow and they weren't looking at what the market was asking, and they have to close. And so you have to be flexible enough to say, I have to move with, maybe not move with every trend, but you have to move with what the market is asking of you. And so staying relevant and I mean, yes, I love like a good business plan is essential, but I'm always like, you don't have to have everything planned out. You have to leave room for movement and growth and change.
No. And how do you feel when women are especially are in these businesses and they're putting their hearts and souls into it? How do you bring your authentic self to your products? How do you showcase that like this is something that like you're building and you're doing?
Yeah, I know. And there's so much of it. Like there's so much content like that of
Yeah.
like, follow me in my day of a life as a founder on, TikTok and stuff. And
Hmm.
I think some of that is like too much sharing, like it's oversharing, and there's so many platforms to share it on. But I do think as a female founder, to have confidence in what you're doing is the number one way to succeed. And and then I think number two is surrounding yourself with people who are going to help you get there, because we're not all great at everything. So I'm a big believer. I'm like, if you're not great in the bookkeeping space, bring in a great bookkeeper, bring in
Yeah.
build out,
Outsource.
outsource, and bring in, different people at different levels who are going to be able to support you to make you kind of bulletproof. So being able to go out and find those people is essential. But, I do think believing and having confidence in what you're doing every day is very important. I'm not saying it's going to be there every day, because as an entrepreneur, I can tell you there are days I wake up and I go, what am I doing? Is this going to work? I mean, that's just the
Yeah.
way it always happens. And I have like this key phrase that I said, being a female entrepreneur can be lonely, but it doesn't have to be, right? And so you really do need to find people that surround you, that pick you up on those days where it is really hard.
I love that. And so out of all these female founders and like the multiple businesses and the books that you've done, what are the biggest challenges you think the female founders are facing today? And how do they navigate through these from the digital space to, you know, to imposter syndrome to just trying to launch and get off the ground or moving an idea?
Yeah, well, one, there's a lack of funding for female founded brands. It's extremely hard for females to get their companies funded the same way that it happens with male founded
Yeah.
companies. It's a fact. There's a million stats out there. And so that is a challenge. And I think because it's a challenge, it adds in a layer of women going, oh, I can't do this. This is too hard. Or I'll never get the capital that I need, or I won't be able to grow. And so they don't even try. But I think what happens is if you can find these right communities and you can find other people who are willing to help you along the way and make connections and introductions, it's going to be easier for you. Which leads me to what I really think that happens with female founders is that we're siloed. We're in a
Yeah.
world of our own. most of the clients that I'm working with in more of a business coaching space and being an advisor on their team have very small teams. And so they're constantly asking themselves, is this the right thing I should do for the company? How can I grow here? And they have no one to bounce it off of. They don't have big C-suites built out, you know? And so I think that's where we kind of start to see that when women are trying to move the companies forward, they're really just like asking themselves a lot of these questions, and
Yeah.
they're stuck.
I feel like we silo ourselves into just doing it by ourselves. Like we already are doing everything on our own and we're in the age of the girl boss and everything else
Yeah.
and we're trying to do it all. But it doesn't hurt to have like some kind of network or some kind of friend group or just advisors that you could
Yeah.
ask questions to. Like I feel like
Yeah.
once you have a seat at the table, you have to at least pull like 2 to 3 seats
Yeah.
for other women to sit, or else we're going to get nowhere in any of this.
Yes. And that was always my challenge, that for the years that I was running Rustic Wedding Chic, we had a very small team, and the people that we did bring on were contract employees,
Yeah.
junior, I mean, so they were not the ones that I would particularly make big sort of C-suite level decisions with. And so I constantly would be finding myself asking my husband at the dinner table, and he was like, I don't know what the right thing is to tell you here,
Yeah.
And so that was always the frustration. And then when I wanted to sell, I really felt, because we weren't huge enough of a name to like go to a huge broker in Manhattan, right? Like that was going to be a challenge to even find the
Yeah.
right firm to work with. I was like, I have all of these questions and they're not getting answered at all. I have no roadmap for this. I have no one who,
Yeah.
in my circle, no one who had exited successfully in the same kind of space that I was to ask questions, and I had a lot of self-doubt around it. And so that is why I'm so passionate about helping women as they go to exit, because there's just not it's not out there as much.
No, it's not. And especially as you said, like without you can't even really start. The investment isn't even there. So how are you supposed to start from the beginning if you don't have that kind of support, let alone build it and then exit?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we are wrapping up here, but I have one last question for you. If you could give one piece of advice to your 16-year-old self, what would
Ooh,
that be? I
oh
know
man,
she's a different person.
she was tricky. Um, let's see. Okay, I think I did not lack a lot of confidence at 16. I was very confident in myself, so I didn't have those issues. I somehow skated through being a teenage girl without body issues, which I'm thankful for.
Free social media.
So, yeah, free social media. You're right. Okay, I would say I think um, probably to just be true to what I want and not be so influenced as what I thought other people, or following what other people's paths that looked cool or what they were doing.
Yeah.
I kind of was like, oh, she's doing that. Maybe I should try to have my life be that way, And so I think that I probably would say it's best just to be really, really true to who you are and what you want in life,
Yeah.
and not try to follow what anybody else is doing.
I love that. Stay true to yourself. I mean, it's good advice for now.
Yeah. Yes. I
It's good
know.
in business, it's good in life. Like,
It
stay true to who
is.
you are.
Something changed. It's different now that I'm in my early 40s, and I have, my kids are a little bit
Yeah.
older. You Something just happens where you're like, you make your own decisions that are best for you and your family, and you kind of don't care as much about what everybody else is doing.
You get tired.
Yes,
That's what
you get tired. Yes, yes,
that's what I'm saying. I'm like, we're too tired to worry about what everybody else is thinking or doing. I'm like, I don't know who has energy for this. We're too
it's true.
tired.
Yep,
Well,
we are. We're
plug where
exhausted.
people can find you. Like, where can we find you on Instagram, your website, all the amazing things, so that way we
Okay.
have the listeners following you?
Yep. So you can go to MaggieLord.com. That has all my information about how I work with clients. Maggie Lord and Company on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me, and I'm always open to having a chat with anybody. So please email me.
I think that's great. So, listeners, email Maggie. She's got a wealth of knowledge and has just been so inspirational. And I've learned so much from her just in the time that we've gotten to know each other. Thank you so much for coming on, Maggie. I'm so excited for the listeners to be able to hear all about this and wish you the best for the future.
Thank you. I appreciate it.